House Bill 659. You can look this up on the Vermont legislature's website. I'll just start right out quoting from the bill. This is the summary. This bill proposes to allow a minor who identifies as transgender to consent to receiving hormone blockers and other non-surgical gender-affirming care and treatment without requiring parental consent. You ready for more? This bill has a preamble section, sort of a rationale where it justifies why it's doing what it's doing. Quote, according to a 2021 national survey by the Trevor Project, 42% of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning youth recently seriously considered attempting suicide, including more than half of transgender and non-binary youth. End quote. No. No. The Trevor Project is a queer advocacy organization, and I don't trust any of the so-called studies that come out of these organizations. Most of them are self-reports with no validation. They do not control for confounding variables, and even if that quoted statistic were true, 42%, it's not because these kids are trans or non-binary or asexual or queer. It's because they have mental health problems. Because trans identification itself is a symptom of mental health problems. It's not standalone. There's no such thing as I'm just naturally trans and everything else is fine. And we know, because we've talked about this on the show before, one study from the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine looked at a cohort of kids who identified as, who were diagnosed with gender dysphoria, which used to be called gender identity disorder, and found that 88% of them had psychiatric comorbidities, and the vast majority of the kids in that study had attachment problems and trauma. That's a way of talking around the plain fact that the majority of them come from abusive and neglectful homes. Next part of Vermont's rationale. Quote, numerous studies have shown that transgender youth, especially those whose families reject their transgender identity or refuse to consent to providing them gender-affirming care and treatment, are at elevated risk for anxiety, depression, and suicidality. This is suicide baiting, and it's particularly disgusting suicide baiting. It's emotional blackmail because it's directed at families. It is directly accusing parents of causing their kids to want to kill themselves or to actually kill themselves if the parents refuse to call a boy child a girl, or if they refuse to allow them to be put on heavy-duty drugs like Lupron that will stop their puberty and mess them up. So refusing to do these things will cause your child to kill themselves. You see how parents have been scared into adopting this. It's summed up in, I don't remember who said this, but one of these disgusting, perverted advocates framed it this way. Would you rather have a trans child or a dead child? Does that sound like cluster B to you? It should, because it is. Next quote. The Trevor Project has found that affirming transgender and non-binary youth by respecting their pronouns and allowing them to change legal documents to conform to their gender identity is associated with lower rates of attempted suicide among these populations. All right. So if you don't want the children to kill themselves, you have to respect their pronouns. What does that mean? It means tell the lie that they and their teachers and everybody else want you to tell. Affirm their delusion, cooperate with it, help psychologically strengthen that delusion, and allow them to falsify their records. Kevin was telling me, and I don't know if he has a chance to tell me in my ear if I'm remembering this correctly, but I think Kevin and I were talking the other day about, I think a bill was just signed in Vermont that allows people to change the sex designation on their birth certificates. Kevin, do I remember that right? Yeah, Governor Phil Scott signed it. I'll check up on that for the next show, But that's amazing. What this is not respecting anyone's identity. This is legalized falsification of statistical records. It's falsification of public records. So you have to allow them to falsify their public records, and you have to collude with a lie, or they will kill themselves. You don't want to make them kill themselves, do you? Do you actually believe that? Does anyone actually believe that? And here's a question that I would ask that you could ask of people who do believe this. And I understand that you can get taken in by this. It's very emotive, and it can trigger your emotional activation system much more quickly than your rational thought. So if somebody is taken in by this, I would ask them, let's just take a step back and ask a few questions about it. Why does it seem plausible to you that this population of youth will kill themselves, will literally take their own lives, if you don't lie and tell them that they are the opposite sex? Does putting it plainly that way help you see what's actually being proposed? Does it really, truly make sense to you that if you don't allow them to falsify their birth certificate so that the actual official state record claims that a girl was born in 1978, not a boy? Well, listen to me. I'm talking about my generation. These kids were born in the 2000s, excuse me. Do you really believe that they are at an elevated risk of suicide if they are not allowed to falsify their birth certificates? Does that make sense? Hopefully that can open a chink in the armor for some people. And don't you think that if someone is truly this mentally fragile, and I think there's probably some of both going on here. I think both that there are a lot of kids who call themselves transgender who do have unresolved trauma. They are being abused and neglected. They do have serious psychiatric problems. I think many of them have childhoods like the one that I had. But I also know, from having observed this for many decades, that a lot of this is exaggerated, and many of these kids don't actually have these problems. They have been convinced that they have them, and they may act out the histrionics that accompany it, but it isn't actually true, and it's not helpful to egg them on. But for those who are seriously this mentally fragile, they're that close to suicide, doesn't it seem reasonable to say they have a serious mental health problem that is personally their mental health problem? It's something wrong with their mind and their environment. It's not that the world is doing things to make them commit suicide. This is a psychiatric patient in need of help. That's a personal problem. The world isn't doing this to them. Back to the bill. A minor who identifies as transgender may give consent to receive hormone blockers and other legally authorized non-surgical gender-affirming care or treatment from a licensed healthcare professional working within the healthcare professional's authorized scope of practice. Consent under this section shall not be subject to disaffirmance due to minority of the individual providing consent. My God, that is tortured prose. I'm going to put it to you in plain English. First of all, disaffirmance is not a word. That's not a word. Okay? I was going to ask, do these people even go to school? Yeah, I'm sure they did. They went to public school. What that means in plain English: no one may say no to a child who says that he is a girl and wants to be put on Lupron to block his puberty. They can't say no to him simply because he's a 9-year-old. His being a child it does not count if you're evaluating whether or not to indulge this. It's quite amazing, isn't it? This is amazing. And are you ready for the punchline in this bill? Here it is. The consent of the individual's parent or guardian shall not be necessary to authorize the minor's access to legally authorized non-surgical gender-affirming care or treatment. Translation, parents may not say no. This just took away this bill has not passed yet. It's in committee. But if it passes, it will have taken away parents' rights to make medical decisions for their children and given them to the state and given them to any doctor that that child comes into contact with. And although it does not explicitly say that in the bill, this is they are shielding doctors from liability in this bill. This is a liability shield. If a doctor goes ahead and gives your daughter Lupron and blocks her puberty over your objections, this bill shields them. It doesn't have to say explicitly that it shields them from liability. That is the effect of this bill. And I hope it doesn't go through, but if it does, I want to see this state sued to oblivion. You monsters. This makes children the property of the state. I'm trying very hard to keep my temper because I'm extremely angry about this. I'm horrified by this. I'm going to show you the sponsors of this bill, and if this makes you as angry and alarmed and outraged as it does me, I'm asking you to please contact them. Please make noise. Do it publicly too. Say it on social media. Bomb their phone lines with phone calls. Just get those phone calls in, get those emails in, talk about it on social media. The main sponsor is Representative Tanya Vyhovsky, and you can see her contact information. Her telephone number is 802-828-2228. Her email is the following letters: T, V as in Victor, Y, H, O, V as in Victor, S as in Sam, K, Y, at ledge.state.vt.us. It's less cumbersome if you just hop over to the legislature's website, look up the bill. They've got links to their contact information. Here is their co-sponsor, Mr. Taylor Small. His phone number is 802-828-2228. And I want to tell you something about the main sponsor here. It's horrifying, but it's absolutely in step with what we know. Tanya Vyhovsky is a licensed clinical social worker and practicing counselor. These people are your enemy. Keep your children away from them. Social workers, don't come in contact with them if you don't have to. They are poison.